Start recording. And first off, I would like to introduce and welcome our presenters today, Erin Hughes and Andrea Cudworth. Erin has worked as our Mukurtu Hub Manager for this project since 2016. She's a graduate of the iSchool at UW-Madison. And Andrea Cudworth has been working with us for the past year. She is a PhD candidate in the linguistics program at the UW-Madison. And they will tell you more about our partners and our funders for this project and sort of WiLS's role in this project as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erin and Andrea. Let me hand off the controls here.
Thanks, Emily. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope.
You sound good.
Okay, great. So this is Erin, and I'm here with Andrea as well. Hello. And as Emily said, we've both been working on this IMLS funded grant, which is called Mukurtu Hubs and Spokes, a sustainable platform for community digital archiving. And WiLS and the UW-Madison iSchool are working with Washington State University, which is where Mukurtu was envisioned and is managed today. We're establishing a Mukurtu Midwest Regional Hub, which is providing training and support to tribal and non-tribal libraries, archives, and museums. The goal of this grant is to really expand the adoption of Mukurtu, to facilitate user testing with the communities we're working with, and extend Mukurtu in its development. So in addition to our hub, there are 4 others that are working on this grant. There's the Alaska Native Language Archives, the University of Hawaii Department of Linguistics, the University of Oregon Libraries, and Yale University's Beneke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. So today we just really want to talk to you about what Mukurtu is and why we need a system like Mukurtu, discuss some of the key things that really separates it from other content management systems, and show you some examples of Mukurtu in action. So Mukurtu is a free and open source digital archive and content management tool. It's aimed at the specific needs of Indigenous peoples globally. It's also a tool that can be adapted to the local cultural protocols and dynamic intellectual property needs of any community. So this capability is what really separates Mukurtu from other content management systems. It was in 2002 that Dr. Kimberly Christian, who began this project, traveled with the Warramunga community members to the National Archives of Australia. You can see her working with that community here in this image. It's while visiting the Warramunga members, while visiting the archives, that the Warramunga members really expressed this tension when viewing images and documents that were held by the archives. This tension really centered on the violation of the community's cultural protocols. So for example, images of deceased were displayed online without any warning, and pictures of sacred sites lacked any connection to the ancestors who cared for those places, and ritual objects were disconnected from their original context. So it was through this meeting and this time together that the Warramunga community expressed a need for a system that respected the social and cultural systems for sharing, circulating, and creating knowledge within their community. So between 2002 and 2005, Kim collaborated with the Warramunga community members to define and develop this initial community digital archive, which you can see a screenshot of here on the slide. And during this time, a Warramunga elder and archivist came up with the name Mukurtu for the content management system. So Mukurtu means dilly bag in the Warramunga language. Dilly bags, they hold sacred materials, and elders keep and protect them as part of their obligations to care for their communities. But the elders could not be stingy with what the dilly bags held and had to open them up when younger generations asked respectfully. So Jones chose Mukurtu as the name for the community archive to remind the users that the archive is a safekeeping place where the Warramunga people could share their stories, knowledge, and cultural materials properly within their own community's protocols. Okay, so let's take a look at why we need Mukurtu with some examples in action. This image is the second annual message from Andrew Jackson regarding Indian affairs from December 6, 1830. Andrew Jackson signed into law the Indian Removal Act on May 28, 1830. Jackson said to Congress, quote, "It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government steadily pursued for more than 30 years in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond the white settlements is approaching to a happy consummation. It will place a dense and civilized population in large tracts of country now occupied by a few savage hunters," end quote. This view of Native peoples as savages, a group of people near extinction, was and is a common viewpoint which contributed to violence, disloyalty to treaties, and attempts at assimilation, which is still felt today by all Native peoples. Jackson talks about a civilized population in land that is occupied by Native peoples. This narrative is very common through U.S. history and even some current events. In their eyes, the American Indians weren't using the land the way they would, and therefore the use of the land was wrong. Mukurtu seeks to flip this narrative and allow Native groups to determine for themselves how to present and portray their own stories and cultural knowledge. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Isaac McPherson from August 13, 1813, wrote this quote that you see here. This letter shows Jefferson's ideas on information freedom. He emphasized the neutrality of knowledge. However, it's devoid of social and cultural aspects. It is crucial for information library, archive, and museum professionals to be considering and thinking about the social and cultural aspects of their collection items and not just the items themselves. Collecting institutions are intimately tied to the colonization process. Although there has been a move toward collaboration and consultation within the museum world, there are still a lot of problems. Some legislation has been passed, such as NAGPRA, to help some institutions begin returning important items back to the tribes they originated with, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There are few regulations on libraries and archives to collaborate with Native communities on collections or to repatriate historic audio recordings, photographs, sensitive cultural information that has previously been removed from tribal control. So I don't know how many of you have seen this image before, but this is an image of the iceberg concept of culture. And really it's just showing that when we see an iceberg, the portion which is visible above the water is in reality only a small piece of a much larger whole. So similarly, people often think of culture as the numerous observable characteristics of a group that we can see with our eyes, be it their food, dances, music, art, etc. The reality, however, is that there are, it's merely just an external manifestation of a much deeper and broader concept of culture. The complex ideas and deeply held preferences and priorities known as attitudes and values. So these things are primarily learned ideas of what is good, right, and desirable, as well as what's bad, wrong, and undesirable. So in many cases, our different cultural groups share these similar core values, such as honesty or respect, but these are often interpreted differently in different situations and incorporated in unique ways into each of our daily lives. So Mukurtu is really a tool that is striving to reframe Indigenous people's experiences with libraries, archives, and museums. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the features that really separate Mukurtu from other content management systems and how it's implementing this ability to reframe Indigenous people's experiences. So first and foremost, all instances of Mukurtu are structured around the Mukurtu 3 Cs. These are really the foundation of any Mukurtu site. All content and metadata are filtered through these. So we have communities, which are the who of Mukurtu, cultural protocols, which are the how of Mukurtu, and categories, which are the what of Mukurtu. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about these. So communities represent a group of content contributors and the site users. They can be large or small, public or private. There can be as many communities as desired. These can include families, kids, clans, tribal governments. These communities contain digital heritage items that are relevant to the specific community members. So through membership in communities, users can interact with and join the cultural protocols. This is an example of the Plateau Peoples web portal. The tribal paths that are circled here are the communities that were created by the Plateau Peoples. You can see that there are 8 communities who have collaborated on this Mukurtu site. All right, and then we have cultural protocols. And protocols really provide users with appropriate access to communities and categories. Protocols should be seen as types of sharing because setting protocols is not about restricting access, it's about defining access in appropriate ways according to the community. So the image that you see here is a display in Australia where an image was masked over because a person had passed away. So it's a tactile way of showing the protocols in action. So these protocols exist within individual communities, and each community can have multiple cultural protocols. So items are placed within at least one cultural protocol and can be viewed by users who are also members of the protocol. So Kim Christian says, quote, that protocols are not rigid, they assume change, they accept negotiation, and they are inherently social, not given, neutral, or natural, unquote. So all of these access settings, including the protocols, can be altered over time to reflect the changing beliefs or changes in the status of individuals. So for each protocol you create, you can decide whether it should be open, meaning accessible to anyone with access to your site, or strict, meaning accessible to only the community members that you choose. And you can easily provide layered access by adding more than one cultural protocol to an item. So for an example, an item with protocols for women only and elders only could only be seen by female identifying elders on that Mukurtu site. So here is just an example of some of the protocols that people use. And again, these protocols will be site specific. It really just depends on what the community desires. Okay, and then the categories are the what of Mukurtu. They help users search and browse for content. They are terms that describe digital heritage items with vocabularies that are meaningful to communities. Mukurtu does not default to controlled vocabularies because this program has primarily been used by Indigenous communities. And so the categories are applied site-wide across all the communities and help with navigation and browsing. It's typically best to select a relatively small number of categories that represent a wide scope of the digital heritage items. So for example, land use, language, education curriculum, hunting and fishing, artwork, natural resources, ceremonies, just to name a few that have been used by various groups. So returning to the Plateau Peoples web portal, these are some of the categories that they have chosen to represent their communities. They have topics such as lifeways, natural resources, or education. These are categories that the Plateau Peoples wanted to prioritize for visitors to their site. So they chose what they wanted represented on their main categories page. So there are other categories beyond these as well that that users of the site can access. So again, these categories will be site specific because another tribal group may want to emphasize different categories that are important to them. Mukurtu won't default to these specific categories. Okay, and now that we've seen some of the kind of the main components of Mukurtu that all instances of Mukurtu are based off of, I do want to share some of the other cool features within Mukurtu, some of which are very much just Mukurtu specific things, which I think, again, separated out from other content management systems. So the first thing we're going to share are community records. So community records, they allow for a greater range of information to be shared about a specific digital heritage item. And when I say digital heritage item, that's kind of a term that Mukurtu has come up with to describe the visual items that you see and all the metadata that goes with it. These community records can be used for a number of different purposes. So, for example, it could be used to preserve an institutional record while also enabling community members to add their own knowledge to the item, allowing members of multiple communities to share their own information without really having to edit or erase other community members' contributions, or sharing select metadata fields with different communities to help promote appropriate access to knowledge. So when a community record is created from a digital heritage item, they are displayed together and they share the same media asset, but the rest of the metadata is completely independent. So community records can have different sets of cultural protocols from the parent record, which can be an effective tool to ensuring select metadata fields are shared with the right people. So this community record page displayed is showing metadata that is part of the Washington State University Libraries, Manuscript Archives, and Special Collections. This is an example of a digital heritage item page and community record that the Plateau people have allowed open for public access. So if we logged into the site as a registered user, there may be more pages associated with this item that are unique to the communities of users of the site. So the Plateau people have chosen what is publicly accessible and what is privileged information that only tribal members may access. So this next slide shows the other community record page associated with that media asset, and this shows the metadata that's been contributed by the Yakima community.
Another way of organizing the digital heritage items is through collections. This allows for easier access to high-interest digital heritage items, and it can represent existing physical collections and display selected digital heritage items together. The collection can have a featured image and additional description, and it can include digital heritage items with different cultural protocols. All these different protocols would still apply within the collection. So this is an example of the collection landing page for the Confluence Story Gathering collection. It has a summary and description of the whole collection, and then the individual items within the collection follow below. A useful feature that can be added to digital heritage items entries is related items. In this heritage item that we see here, the site administrator has entered side A and side B of this audio recording as two digital heritage items, but has related them together so a site user would be able to immediately find the other side of the recording or the tape without rerunning their search parameters. This could be used to connect any related items. For example, it could connect digital heritage items and dictionary entries if there's a recording of a language lesson or a specific linguistic feature in use that could be associated with the dictionary to help learners see more about that particular item, that particular dictionary entry that they're looking at. There's multiple ways that this can be used. The Book Pages feature lets you meaningfully display longer documents that would have unique metadata on each page. So this would allow for easier browsing, and you can create original content within this digital heritage item. So this is an example of a digital scrapbook where the pages belong together as a digital heritage entry for the scrapbook, but each page has its own unique metadata, such as the names of the people in the images, locations, really anything that is necessary to be unique for each page. Some communities have also used this function for multiple angles of an item. Visitors to this page can see all the beautiful detail work from multiple angles and sides of this basket. So this would contribute to a museum having a digital access to their collection and still accurately representing all the important angles and features of an item that isn't being seen in person. Then we have person records, and these allow for rich biographical records to be integrated into Mukurtu. You can add birth and death dates, include custom text and media sections, identify relationships between people, and aggregate all digital heritage items where a person is included. So, for example, this feature offers users of a site to potentially look up a relative or ancestor they never met, and maybe even see an image of them, hear their voice, or read about their life, or see their involvement in projects through various associated digital heritage items. So here's an example of how a person would show up within a digital heritage item, and then you can click on the link and it'll take you back to the person record where you can see more information and associated items with that person. Media content warnings allow you to flag potentially sensitive media assets. So for example, many Aborigine tribes in Australia have a taboo on viewing the image of a deceased tribal member. So when a user comes to a page with a media asset that has a content warning, potentially containing footage of someone who has passed away, they are presented with a blacked out box in place of the media overlaid with descriptive text. So the user can then choose to click through and access the media or choose not to in awareness of potential taboos within their community. So this feature does not prevent users from accessing media, rather it gives them the choice to access if they want to after being made aware of potentially sensitive content. This is an image of the media content warnings when browsing the digital heritage items. So again, this warning would show up whether browsing through search results or when selecting on the digital heritage item itself. So another really great tool is Mukurtu Mobile. This was really created for gathering real-time collection of dynamic content, but it also is really helpful for communities that may struggle with internet access and allows them to use the mobile app to gather materials and then sync those materials with their Mukurtu site later. It maintains all their site protocols, communities, and categories, and it doesn't contain all the metadata, but it has quite a few of the metadata fields for you to add. And then once the content is synced to your site, you can go back and edit and extend that metadata as you see fit. The Mukurtu dictionary allows for rich, engaging word and or phrase entries in an existing Mukurtu CMS site. The dictionary uses a distinct metadata scheme from digital heritage items to best represent and display linguistic content. For example, Menominee and Algonquian language spoken in Wisconsin has parts of speech that English doesn't have. The Mukurtu metadata format allows for a dictionary entry for language-specific parts of speech. It also has a robust search and filter tool to allow easier discovery of what a user may be searching for. And it has the ability to embed audio, images, video to connected dictionary entries with digital heritage items, which helps highlight language and support language learners. If there's video of a language lesson, that whole lesson or specific cuts of the audio can all be connected in various ways to the dictionary entries of the words or phrases. The entry can also contain additional information about use of the word or phrase that may be user knowledge or speaker knowledge, but may not show up in a more traditional dictionary format. So these will also have different metadata and displays from the digital heritage items because they are a separate but supporting feature within the site.
Okay, and then Mukurtu also uses traditional knowledge labels. These labels are really meant for third-party and public domain materials. They define a community's understanding of their materials and how they should be shared, circulated, and accessed. So there are basic definitions that a community can use for these traditional knowledge labels, or a community can define what each label means to them. The traditional knowledge labels are designed to identify and clarify which material has community-specific protocols of access and use associated with them. It invites non-native viewers to be responsible when interacting with the materials. And traditional knowledge labels are not legal licenses. They're not substitutes for traditional copyright or Creative Commons licenses. So you can see some of these labels here. And this is an example of a community-defined traditional knowledge label for attribution. So those are just some of the cool things that Mukurtu has to offer. So what we'd like to do now is pull up just some examples of different sites using Mukurtu, and we'll have a list of other sites as well further on if you want to look into additional ones.
We've seen some examples already from the Plateau People's web portal, and you can browse through it yourself as well. The Plateau People's web portal is a collaboratively curated and a reciprocally managed archive of Plateau cultural materials. The portal is a gateway to Plateau People's cultural materials held in multiple repositories, including Washington State University's manuscripts, archives, and special collections, the Northwest Museum of Art and Culture, the National Anthropological Archives, and the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian Institution. The materials in the portal have been chosen and curated by tribal representatives. Each item has one or more records associated with it, as well as added traditional knowledge and cultural narratives to enhance and enrich understanding to many audiences.
All right, this is the Pasmoquati site, and actually one of the great things about this site is that you can see some of the updates that Washington State University has been working on as part of this grant project. This site is on the 2.1 release, so all of the improvements were from communities working with Washington State University or on this hub grant. So it's really neat to see some of that stuff in action. We just recently, yesterday, actually, all of our sites were updated, so we have some editing and work to do on them, but it's great to see some of the improvements in action. So this site holds wax cylinder recordings that were made in Calais, Maine in 1890. So these recordings were first returned to the Pasmoquati community in the 1980s. David Francis, he's the Pasmoquati ancestral language specialist, was able to listen and transcribe 4 of these cylinders. So in 2014, they began a new project with local context and the American Folklife Society to listen again to these recordings because the sound quality had been improved. So this new project became the impetus for this digital archive. So they wanted to put the recordings in a Pasmoquati controlled archive where their community could listen to them and add the Pasmoquati transcriptions and English translations in their own time. So while they work on transcribing these recordings with their language speakers, elders, and children, they are also using this archive as a way to share other parts of their history and culture. So it's really neat. If you visit the site, you can actually hear some of these recordings yourself. And then we have the Voices of Amisbati, which is a digital archive space that supports the community to really create, share, discover, and celebrate the local Indigenous content online. So this is supported by the Canada 150 grant, and they're working with the Edmonton Public Library to develop this initiative in consultation and collaboration with Indigenous communities and individuals within Edmonton. So Voices of Amisbati is a space that's owned by the Indigenous community. The Edmonton Public Library has collaborated with Indigenous communities and individuals. They're working together to gather, create, host, and share stories in the form of text, videos, sound files, and images. So the stories that they're supporting learning, understanding, and celebration of Indigenous peoples within that area.
The HoChunk Wazija Hachi Language Division Archiving Project began in 2017 as part of a student-led project that I was involved with, in which we began the process of cataloging, digitizing, and archiving the cultural and education materials that are housed at the HoChunk Language Division. The Language Division works diligently to bring the HoChunk language into classrooms and educational settings all around Wisconsin. They have education programs for children who are not yet attending school, and then they also have language classrooms for kindergarten through high school, and they also host language opportunities for college students at the UW-Madison as well as other locations throughout Wisconsin. The Language Division itself houses decades worth of language materials for both learners and instructors, including stories, interviews with eminent speakers, textbooks, workbooks, language lessons, and much, much more. The project is still in its early phases, but the goal is to make the HoChunk language and cultural materials remotely accessible to all tribal members, no matter where they may live. They live all over Wisconsin, all over the nation, all over the world, and this project will bring their community and their language into their houses wherever they're logging in from. So the Language Division has a project specialist who is directing the project, as well as a variety of student volunteers from UW-Madison and myself, funded from Mukurtu support by WiLS. Other aspects of the project are supported by the iSchool, the information school at UW-Madison, and an IMLS grant. Aspects of the project include cataloging items. This is paper documents, audio recordings, video recordings, games, anything. We digitize these variety of original AV formats. There have been DV cams, cassettes, VHSs, reels. We're constantly working with digital professionals around the university and around the state to be accurately working on digitizing these items. We also coordinate with communities, categories, and collections for Mukurtu, and are working on developing a content and access review process for both the items and the users. We're working with eminent speakers and elders in efforts to accurately represent the HoChunk Nation. All right, and here's a list of some of the other sites, just a few, some of which we've been working on, including the Great Lakes Culture Keepers, and then our Mukurtu Midwest site is there, but just some other highlights as well. If you want to see more, you can also go to Washington State University's Mukurtu site. They have some featured
sites there as well. And I also wanted to add, because I forgot that this happened, but we actually have, in addition to the 5 hubs recently, an additional hub has been added, and that hub is in Australia. I'm working with a team, I think they're based out of Sydney, at the University of Technology, Sydney, working with their Indigenous Services team. So we also have them joining on to this grant, and they will be working on creating a community site as well. So I think that might be all we have. So I guess we can, open it up for questions or comments.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks, Andrea. This is really great to see how much sort of uptake there has been with this platform. It's only been, available broadly distributed for a few years, and it's being used, nationally and internationally, which is super cool. Does anyone have any questions? You can, if you have questions, you can add them to our chat now, or you're also welcome to get in touch with either Erin or Andrea directly. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again to both of you. We're really excited to have both of you working with WiLS. Like I said, it's been a really great learning experience for myself, and I think the rest of the WiLS team as well. We have Andrea with us just until the end of May. She'll be finishing her dissertation and moving on to new things. And Erin will be with us through the end of September, which is when the IMLS grant with Washington State wraps up. I am going to put in a quick plug for our next WiLSWorld short, which is coming up on April 12th. That's also a Friday at 1 p.m. It's presented by Jessamine West, and it'll focus on online privacy. The title of the session is 5 Steps to Better Online Privacy. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Erin and Andrea, for sharing all of your awesome work. And everybody have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for attending.